I'm excited to share with you today an interview I had with Amy O'Leary, who is the Executive Director of Strategies for Children, which is an advocacy and policy organization in Massachusetts that works to make sure children from birth to 5 have all the resources they need and access to high quality education and care programs. And in our interview, we talk about Amy's starting of the 9:30 call, which is a virtual community that she started at the beginning of the pandemic, how it's evolved since then, what she thinks about important aspects of community, how people can mentor in different communities and share knowledge. And Amy talks about the most influential community that she has been a part of recently. So please enjoy and share your comments, and I look forward to seeing you next time. So I've obviously been lucky enough to have been a participant in the 9:30 call. I've obviously listened to it many times as well, but I'd love for you to tell me how it came about.
Sure. So in March 2020, as we were kind of all entering this new space around the pandemic, um, we there was a group of folks that had gotten together every year around Advocacy Day at the State House. So we were kind of used to working together around advocating for the budget. And we decided to kind of start with that group to have just a daily check-in. And as I thought about it, it's kind of similar to when you're working on a campaign that you just check in once a day, kind of beginning of the day, to kind of make sure everyone's on the same page, and just to have a standing meeting. And what we learned is, in those early days of the pandemic, everybody was trying to figure out, should we be meeting with the commissioner? Should we be talking to legislators? How should we be talking to the folks who are doing the work? All these decisions had to get made. And it was just unclear and terrifying for people who were doing the work. So we started kind of the daily call with a Zoom link that we changed every week, and really with that kind of first initial group. And then I've been now at Strategies for Children for 21 years, and the work that we did around universal pre-kindergarten, where we wrote a bill by going around to 32 community forums and writing legislation by flip chart. I also knew and know the power of having more people involved. And kind of one of our values as an organization is inclusivity and building community. And so we decided that we wanted to make this call available to anybody that wanted to be on it. And as programs closed down and before even emergency programs were set up, there was a period of time that people just wanted to get accurate information, be together, and just to figure things out. And so at that time, we were doing the 9:30 call 5 days a week, 9:30 to 10 o'clock in the morning. And it really was an opportunity to get information from the Department of Early Education and Care as they were trying to develop policies, hear what was happening kind of on the ground, especially as folks were working with children and families, and then to really think about what information we wanted together, and how we could use this time. Only 30 minutes, it goes quickly, but just that daily touch point, I think, was really critical. And here we are 3.5 years later, doing it 4 days a week. And in some ways, we've had some inflection points like, should we do this? What's the value? What's this continuous loop of improvement that we believe in? But I think what I have been most surprised by is the strength of this community, that people can kind of self-select when they come in. It's across the state, so people can participate from wherever they sit in Massachusetts. But really, it's been this robust community to figure things out.
Yeah, it's an amazing community, just as someone who participates when I can. And what I find is that the topics and the guests you send out weekly are so many of them are either so on the cutting edge of some topic, or they're something that you would never know about unless you get to hear this person's voice. So as a listener, I love that. And it's really invaluable. I mean, the understanding of, I say this way too much, but Brian Stevenson, I'm sure, Equal Justice, and
Yes.
he always says, get proximate. And I feel like your 9:30 call is a way to get proximate because you're hearing from so many corners of the field, of the state, from all these different people, these different projects, programs, and things that, struggles, whatever it is that you wouldn't really know about otherwise.
I think that was one of the most unintended consequences, right? Where we sit as a statewide advocacy organization with kind of 5 staff. We're a lean and mean organization. And then thinking about kind of the privilege that we have of just getting accurate information and having connections and developing relationships, but also having the time because we're not running direct programs, with children and families. So this matchmaking of like who's doing interesting work, who needs to hear about it has been such I don't think we ever came into it thinking about that. I will say kind of there was intentionality about like having Dr. Shu, who was the epidemiologist working with EEC at the time. So she was coming on constantly, not just to give us like the best health information, but really a spiritual advisor and a validator of the work that people were doing. And I think that has been for me, it's also been this equalizer, right? So we have Marissa and I had a phone call with she's a new director in a program, but not new to the field. And we kind of talked to her about the 9:30 call, and she said, "Oh, I saw that, but I saw there were legislators on, and I don't know if that's for me." So this idea that you can have this space where commissioners, US congresswomen, family child care providers, funders, policymakers at all levels are really coming together, hearing the same information, and just depending on each other to think about what this means across, our work. That has been so exciting, and to shine a light on maybe topics that we wouldn't think about or that aren't having meetings. To have this daily check-in. We also have this built-in time to say, oh, well, we can cover that on the 9:30 call. I'll say one more piece around the advocacy and we've talked about this a lot on the call. We would do kind of advocacy 101s at different stages of the legislative and budget process. But now to see that we're doing it in real time, able to share a news article that came from State House News about the revenue picture that's going to impact our advocacy going forward, hearing about the impact of the operational grants, and being able to share these stories. I think it's just made everybody much more effective as advocates and to build relationships. I think we've heard this over and over from elected officials at every level that kind of the key to all of this is building relationships. So it's kind of it's that's been so fun and exciting to watch all these connections happen.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'm thinking about the director that you spoke of who kind of thought, well, this isn't for me because there's someone from a different sector. And it
Right.
does feel like at least when you're on the call, that everyone's kind of in this together. So obviously you're bringing together, funders, politicians, educators themselves, people who are working in advocacy. Have you found at all there's any, and that's a great diverse audience there and community. Have you found there are any challenges with that, or has there, and how have you dealt with those in the call?
I think the when everybody was home, even when emergency programs got set up, there was a lot more flexibility for people's time. As things started opening up, as we saw kind of things coming back to normal, there was certainly the split, like who can work from home, who is going to some place every day, directly working with folks. So I think the 9:30 call at night, which really happens at 6:30. So we've been thinking a little bit about the branding, but we've made this commitment now once a month to have a little bit of a different forum. But we call it the 9:30 call at night because it's in the spirit of the 9:30 call in the morning. And we've had about an hour once a month to kind of connect with folks, mostly can't get there during the day. So they might be providers, family child care providers, they might be educators, they just might be people who are interested to hear what those folks might say. So that's been really cool to have another space. It's a little bit of a different format. It's a little bit more freewheeling. And then one of the things we've been thinking about kind of logistically is we have not recorded many of the 9:30 calls, because in the beginning we wanted to have this environment of, it's happening on the call. We want people to be open and honest, so we didn't want to record it. Now, as we're able to kind of, we had Commissioner Amy Kershaw on the call this morning, both kind of giving a heads up to the folks that we have on the call, and then folks who can't be there that meet. I think we're thinking about for 2024, recording more of the calls and creating a library for that. Probably not every single call, but when we think there might be just an opportunity to get to a wider audience, we're thinking about that. And then someone just had a great idea on the call yesterday that we have a contact sheet so that everybody comes on. We have a place where their kind of name, their organization, and their email is in one place. So we'll be taking that and implementing that in the new year.
That's a great idea. And clearly you're listening to the people who come. I love the idea of the 6 o'clock or 9:30 call at 6 or whatever. Because it certainly does make the call more accessible. I mean, we were thinking about trying to create a community of practice for early educators. And the feedback we heard from the group we were talking to was that it's really, really hard because their days are filled working with children, and then they go home, work, with their families or take classes at night, or there's like no time for them to do, to do it. So some of these support systems are hard to get to some of the people that really need them. So I like that you're at least offering some different times. So what are some of the most valuable lessons you've learned from the 9:30 call, and how might those apply to some other communities or community building?
So we actually right now are in the process of writing a case study about the 9:30 call. So we received funding from a funder, and we're working with a journalist. Her name is Minna Jung, and she is kind of developing a document around the 9:30 call and around a case study, kind of thinking about the beginning and kind of where we are today. We've also thought about creating a toolbox, because the questions that we get from other states or other groups are kind of like, how much work does this take? And like, what are the logistics and the mechanics of getting it done? We kind of laugh because in the beginning of Zoom, we changed the Zoom link every week because of the Zoom bombers that could have potentially showed up. We did that for a long time. We also sent out the emails using just an Excel spreadsheet and BCCing everybody. And now we've created this infrastructure for the 9:30 call, so folks can see the speakers, all the archived materials, so slide decks, any materials that the callers use. So kind of getting some of those pieces in place. I've said now that I'm a morning show host and booking agent because we do a lot of outreach for folks and inviting them to be on the call. And I think it's amazing. We call it the magic of the 9:30 call calendar, because each week as it kind of levels out and we kind of see who's booked when, it has just been incredible to see the diversity of perspectives and topics. And so I think kind of having some of those mechanical logistical things and this continuous improvement loop. We've done quite a few surveys of kind of like what would be helpful, what are we missing, what should we do more of? So it's been helpful to think about that. And then I think just the spirit of the people that show up every day, that again, like you can self-select, people are coming in and out based on their kind of availability, what they want to hear. And so I think kind of listening to folks and that they keep coming. We had Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley on 2 weeks ago, and 175 people came to that call. And, she was an incredible guest. She kind of was so powerful. And I've heard her speak so many times. But there is this different intimacy in Zoom, which seems counterintuitive. But the fact that now most people are joining with their cameras off, but they're listening in. But then kind of, when there are opportunities to kind of connect on camera, have conversations, that's it's been meaningful to see what it means to people. And I think as people are thinking about either replicating it or thinking about ways to expand on it, it's really about it's the point you're talking about, this community, and how do you build trust? How do you build relationships? The accurate information has been a really big, important part for me, because I think I've spoken often about as early educators, we often are kind of centered in a scarcity mentality. which includes scarcity of accurate information or the feeling that nobody really cares, or just kind of being in the know. And that's a horrible feeling. And I think, especially during the pandemic, where people were relying on folks, that became a hallmark of the call, that we were committed to stopping misinformation, reframing with accurate information, and just having the place, not blaming people for it, but having a place where people could ask honest questions. And so Titus kind of said, he's coined this phrase like the call to community, and that's really what it's about. So, as people are thinking about it, and what does it mean for you to build this a community, whatever that looks like? And then how do you kind of make the commitment as an organization, as an individual, to think about what it's going to take?
Do you have any kind of pulse on how big, I know you were thinking of creating a contact list, but do you have any kind of sense of how big the community is?
So we had folks sign up to get the daily speaker list. So that's about 1,500 people
Oh,
as
wow.
part of our database. So like
Amazing.
that email goes out to 1,500 people, and then we we add folks on social media. I think the other thing that's incredible is like somebody will like a new person's probably coming every day, and we've also had real big interest from our advocacy network participants, Paula and Harold, who were on the call earlier this week, who really want to think about language accessibility. And maybe we were thinking about, they are very interested in expanding information to folks who speak Spanish. And so, what do some of the offshoots look like? How do you take kind of this idea of bringing people together and then thinking about accessibility?
Hmm. It's a really good point. It's something that we've come across in the courses we created as well, because a lot of people are interested, but they're asking us, do you have them in Spanish? Do you have them in
Right,
Mandarin? Do you have them in Portuguese? And so
right.
that's something we've been thinking about. Um, if you'll allow me to expand the conversation slightly beyond the 9:30 call,
Sure.
I read an interview that you gave with the Boston Foundation. I think it was in
Oh,
2020.
yes.
And in that interview, you mentioned that there used to be a really strong infrastructure for mentoring people who come into the field and either to be directors or just to progress in their careers, and that didn't really exist so much anymore. And I'm wondering if you could talk about maybe what that used to look like and sort of
Sure.
then the hole that's created and maybe the opportunity that's there now.
It's a great question, and appreciate the research. I started my career at Ellis Early Learning as a teacher, and then became a director kind of 3 years in. And like many teachers, I was promoted to director as a good teacher, but not necessarily somebody that had all the skills of being a director or manager. So at the time in Boston, we had this infrastructure. We had the Boston Child Care Alliance, which was a funded organization that really was focused on bringing this advocacy, information, and voice to early education and school age provider. We had the Intercity Network of Directors, which we met monthly and was a directors group where you could just, what was on your mind was the first agenda item. And what happened at those meetings were this dynamic where many of we called them seasoned directors, mostly women who had been doing this work for a long time. And there was definitely a group of emerging directors and younger directors. And just this availability to get out of your program to kind of hear what's happening in other places, all kind of rooted in advocacy and empowerment, was just incredible. We also had the 0 to 8 coalition in Boston. And that was the time with the community partnerships. So there was funding available for professional development for some of these innovative things that people are doing in different ways with different funding streams, but just this sense of community in Boston, and that everybody belonged. And that's where I learned about advocacy, as Pat Zaber, one of my mentors, at Boston Child Care Alliance, and I became president of the directors group. And so I got to learn skills that were different than I was kind of learning every day as a director, and think about kind of some of those challenging questions that still exist right now about enrollment, about diversifying your funding, about curriculum, about recruiting educators. So that there was this structure, whether it was a monthly meetings, we didn't really have email yet or social media, so we met in person once a month, And actually, Lynn Mendez of UMass Boston and I kind of resurrected this idea about 2 weeks ago in Boston, kind of starting with a smaller group to just have a gathering of directors. And we had about 8 folks show up. And just the conversation was so meaningful, and to hear what people are going through. It can be so isolating to be, in a program by yourself, trying to figure all this out. I think the 930 call does some of that, but I do think this other kind of local infrastructure to support, whether it's conversation, resource sharing, or just kind of getting to know each other and building relationships was really important to me in my development as a professional, and something we've been thinking a lot about how to support. The early childhood agenda that we've also been working on has a work group around local infrastructure. And my hope is that this will show up there and that we can think about some solutions.
Yeah, education is, I mean, having been a teacher, it's unique in that there's so much knowledge locked up in certain people's brains who've been working in the field for a long time. And if
Right,
you don't create, like you're saying, if you don't create these kinds of structures to pass it on, it just kind of goes with them as they, retire out. And maybe they share it with one or two people, but there's
right,
some amazing ideas, and it is very isolating to work in education. I think at any level. I mean, it's certainly
right,
in early ed, I think is probably the most isolating, at least when you get into elementary and, upper schools, there's a little more collaboration structured into the job. But I mean, I dropped my daughter off at a home daycare, and she has one, amazing woman who cares for the kids, and I think she's amazing, but that's very isolating.
right. It's interesting about K to 12 because the Rennie Center came on the 930 call. They first had kind of a smaller conversation. Then they came on the 930 call and asked the question, like, what do folks do in early ed that we don't even think about that K to 12 can learn from? And some of this is like the kind of a lot of things showed up, like the holisticness of of early ed and working with families. But some of this stuff, it was such an interesting question to me because I think, just like you said, there's so much information in people's minds and experience, and it's really hard to have an outlet to share it, to document it. As part of the work in Boston in the 90s, we worked to create the Leadership Empowerment Action Project, which was a 3 credit course developed by, Bob French in New Bedford, Nancy DePross in Amherst, Pat Xavier in Boston, and it really was, and Patty Natick at Wheelock College. So it was this kind of like 3 credit course to teach all these things that we know are important. I mean, it still exists in like different iterations now, but it was also this recognition of you have to learn this stuff. I think that's been my experience. I didn't know a lot of this when I started at Strategies for Children, but I had, Margaret Blood as a mentor who also took me to different places and explained what was going on. And then just living through the experience of the state budget, of the election cycle, of, building relationships with elected officials. So I think like that's what we want to do at Strategies is curate these opportunities, support people so they feel kind of empowered as they're going into them, and then just kind of unleash the potential that's there, that most times we don't kind of give ourselves permission to do.
Hmm. In that same interview, I love this because I'm curious about what you'll respond now, but you mentioned that at that time you had been in some kind of group and people had gone around and asked for everyone to say a word that reflected how they felt about the early ed field at that time. And your word was seeing at the time. Now I'm wondering, what would your word be today?
That's a great question. I would build on seen that I felt seen, and I would also I would add like curious. I think that people are so curious now about different parts of the system and of the complexities that we talk about. But I think there's also this feeling as everybody thinks that they might know what it's all about, but that there's so much more going on that we don't talk about or reflect in any of the most of our communication, that I think people are curious about kind of figuring it out, which for me is such a symbol and a really significant part of where we are right now and the opportunity we have. And just we've been saying, with the historical investments we've seen, that we are gratified, not satisfied. We heard that from one of our other colleagues at a national meeting. And I think that's it. Like this fear of, we have seen incredible funding come from the state level and the federal level during the pandemic. And just to watch people kind of be able to take a breath and get through a month and not have to worry about as much maybe as they would have if we didn't have that support, that we can help turn that into like, it's okay. It's okay that you need additional funding. It's okay to advocate for yourself. It's okay to not say we have all the answers all the time. But just I think to meet this curiosity and be ready to talk about why this is so important. We've seen decades of research talking about the importance of early ed. If you study child development, we know how much is happening for young children. And I think also for families, new parents, if you have a birth to 5-year-old child, you're a new parent. So I think setting the foundation now, not just in all the ways we've talked about before, about the research and high quality, programming benefiting everybody, but just the living day to day, like how meaningful these places are for little kids, and what a difference they make, for families, for community, and for everybody in our, in the system.
Yeah, I have 3 kids, and their daycares and or some of their preschools have been, I mean, I've been the most intimately connected with the people who work there. They really feel like family. And it's so
Right,
different from when your kids get into, elementary school and thereon,
right,
where you continually learn less and less about what happens.
right,
But yeah, it's a really different kind of relationship. And there's a lot of trust required. I mean, when you start, you giving up a 2, 3, 4 month old baby to someone else is
right,
terrifying. Um, and then, you learn about your child from them, and there's all kinds of things that happen. Uh,
right,
Plus, as you say, just the amount of development that occurs within the child during those years is just unbelievable.
right,
And so I feel like the educators we have in this state are heroes, and they know so much. I mean, I learn from, like, when I pick up my daughter, I learn from her daycare provider because there's so much I don't know about, how to parent a young child.
right.
It's an
Absolutely.
unbelievable resource. I was thinking about when you were talking about the early ed community. I mean, it certainly felt like in the beginning of 2020 that sort of everything was breaking or broken. Um, Maybe including the community itself. How do you feel like the community, and if the community now feels, at least from my humble perspective, more connected? One, do you feel that way? And also, if that's true, what are the strengths of the early ed community right now? And maybe where is it sort of falling down? Where could it use some supports?
I think like the low grade anxiety of like what the investments mean now. So, we have $475 million for these operational grants that have just been game changing. The work that the department is doing most recently at this board meeting about really thinking about the state rate, addressing the inequities that have been kind of, around for decades, and kind of making these bold decisions that when we have this funding, this is how we're going to spend it, which is based on kind of decades worth of feedback and ideas and solutions. And so I think, it can feel tenuous because so much of, we're funded by many different line items at the state budget level. But I think the resiliency, and I think it was a word that was probably overused, but just is so true of the people doing this work every day, of the innovation, the problem solving, the can-do attitude, the like I can fix it, I can make it work. And the one thing I talk about a lot with early ed is like this individualized instruction that is just incredible, that for every child, their level of learning, kind of where they need support. So if you take kind of all the things we know about good child development and apply it to the system, right? We need everything there's not one size fits all from a policy perspective. When you think about keeping equity at the center of this work, that's going to look different in different prototypes, in different programs sizes. but that we know that the basics of it's to stabilize and heal and transform, what Secretary Tutwiler is talking about. This acknowledgement that we can't keep existing in this kind of chaotic system, that that we take some of these things that we know people are doing in their head, or that they've just kind of become practice, that we call them out and say, like, what are some solutions to just, stabilizing things and creating systems that work for educators, that work for programs, and that work for families. I think I am most hopeful that I've ever been that we really are going to figure this out, because I think for a while we felt that it's not like if we're going to do it, but how and when. And I feel that even more strongly now. Again, it's like that everyone's personal empowerment to kind of say, like, I belong. This is part of who I am and my job to be an advocate, instead of like, oh, I'm going to let somebody else do that.
Mm.
We've just seen such incredible response. And then I would say, one of the other things we've done on the 930 call is the first year tour. So after every election cycle, we invite all the newly elected legislators to come and join us. And just even seeing kind of a bit of a shift about who's running for office, what experience they're bringing to the work. Many have young kids, so they're living and breathing daily the challenges that we're talking about. And so I think like all of those pieces are part of the puzzle of really figuring out how we can transform this space.
I love that stabilize, heal, transform. That's a wonderful catchphrase. And so just as a final question, what's an example of one of the most influential communities that you've been part of and why?
Wow, these are great questions. I've been saying recently we are in our third cohort of our advocacy network, which is a group of people from across the state, between like 11 and 15 people in a cohort, who have made a commitment for a year-long experience. So it's a pretty defined community, but we are in our third cohort of network participants. And it has just been, it's everything that I know that is true, that if you give people time, space, support, information, opportunity, and permission to dream big and think about what they could do, as far as moving what they want to see parts of these systems get better. It has just been incredible to see not just what happens in the year that they're part of the network, but what happens after, what happens to them as far as their confidence. We invite the alumni to come back to talk to the next cohort, and just we had that happen this fall, and to hear their own words and their own experiences and their own kind of opportunities that they have created for themselves now. It's just so inspiring. And it's been like a dream of mine to have this kind of a network, because I've had the benefit of being part of learning communities supported by experts in the field, just to learn and practice, right? That's one of our other kind of cultures, is that we need to learn and we need opportunity to practice and then kind of get feedback and then keep going. And I think being able to create that in the advocacy network, to have that consistent time together, and then to just be a support as people go on the journey. And it may look different, they may do something totally different than they thought they might when they started. But that community has been so inspiring. And I mean, I have to say, just the early educators every day who are showing up in their programs, the directors, family chat providers, the educators, just I mean, to watch what they've been able to accomplish over the past 4 years and beyond, it has been pretty inspiring.
That's amazing. It sounds like another example of sort of like knowledge and vision sharing and mentorship all wrapped up into
Yeah.
one amazing community.
I'll say the other piece that's been consistent and again remarkable is their community for each other, right? It's not about a hierarchical community, it's about the shared community. I think that's also one of our values as an organization, is how are we creating, and not even creating, how are we like having the opportunity for spaces where people can kind of show up and be a resource to each other, not just relying on somebody who might be an expert in something.
Now this is when we know we're done, when the preschooler shows up. Hi, cutie.
Hello.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Amy. It's been pleasure speaking with you as always. And I consider you a wealth of amazing knowledge, and it's wonderful to hear some of it. Hopefully I'll get to continue hearing more, but I'll see you probably at a 9:30 call sometime soon.
Yes, thanks so much for doing this work. It's so important, and I love the frame of community. So thank
Thank
you.
you. Well, it's done out of love. So
All
thanks
right,
so
good to
much,
see you.
Amy. Take
Okay,
care.
bye.
Bye. Bye.